Welcome back, my rogues. Today's question is military people of Reddit. Who was the "how the fuck did he pass basic training" guy? Hope you enjoy, and check me out on Instagram. This guy was a student in aviation school while I was an instructor. He was a new soldier attending his technical school after basic. Apparently he was on the autism spectrum but functioned well enough for the army. He was great at physical tasks. That's how he passed basic. He was also very intelligent in the classroom study. If he was directly instructed, he was fine. One day I found him in the hall between classrooms during a class session. He had taken a restroom break but got sidetracked and was staring deeply into the ceiling fan. It took several attempts to get his attention. I had to touch his arm when he didn't respond to my approach or calling his name a few times. It happened a few times with other instructors until our supervisor addressed it with the division chief. It was decided after several medical consultations and meetings with the colonel that it wasn't safe to allow this student to proceed as a helicopter mechanic. It was ultimately a safety matter because he could get mesmerized by a spinning rotor on an airfield. Strangely, I saw him later on a deployment to Afghanistan. He was reclassified as an artillery soldier. At basic, we had a guy who did a version of the Christian Bale deep Batman voice for the entire time and never took off his eye protection, terrifying to be woken up by him for guard duty in the middle of the night. He would just loom over you and say your name while jabbing you violently with his hands. Apparently, his underwear eventually fused to his body because he didn't shower for weeks. The stench was miserable. From what I heard, he was put on suicide watch a couple of weeks after basic. But he passed basic. We had a guy we called Domestic Pepsi. His surname was Internicola. Get it? He was dumber than a bag of hammers. One day, we had a big inspection. Company commander inspecting. The commander eventually made his way to Domestic Pepsi and started asking questions about general Marine Corps knowledge. This recruit does not know. Sir, this recruit does not know. Sir, this recruit doesn't know. Finally, our commander asked him, "Son, you don't even know if you're alive, do you?" There was the longest pause following the question. Then a small, quiet, and incredibly confused voice replied, "Sir, this recruit does know that he is alive." Sir, it's like he actually had to think about it. In his small and intimidated head, he was probably going through all 7 of the facts he knew and seriously asked himself, "Am I alive?" The whole squad of hardened, nearly graduated Marine recruits and our drill instructors all burst into laughter. How he actually graduated, I have no idea. Yes, Marines are a bunch of crayon-eating morons. But Domestic Pepsi was the guy who would choke to death on the paper sheets on each crayon. Anyone who ever lost a weapon in the field, I've seen it happen a couple of times. You feel sorry them because of the consequences they have to face, but at the same time they totally deserve it for the hell they brought upon the whole unit. Lol. Honestly, it was me. Joined the Marines at 17 as an artilleryman. Didn't know at the time that I had high-functioning autism. I could follow instructions well enough, so I got through basic without any real trouble. But I just didn't have much common sense in my head at the time. I didn't like to socialize and was very awkward beyond simple order following things. I got messed with to no end, and wound up beating the snot out of myself from the stress during Fleet Week. Eventually we got deployed to Iraq as civil affairs, and I was put in administrative and office duties, and found I was especially good at office work. In the end, it was a positive experience though. I was forced into having a lot more social interactions than I would have as a civilian. And I was able to work on things like that a lot more than I would have if I had not joined. I still had a lot of trouble after leaving the Marines because it was right at the start of the recession, but I would have been even worse off otherwise. Sold equipment including his gas mask, tac vest and helmet. Started fights with fellow recruits almost every week. Threatened to bring his gang to shoot us up. Still passed. Go figure. Edit for those curious, I don't think he ever passed his trade course. And I'm fairly certain he got kicked out or released before the year was up. Worked with a USAF major long ago. WHOD been in grade for eons because he couldn't give a briefing without scratching his balls. Only the Vietnam War was keeping him in the service. Eventually he went on an orientation tour of a Minuteman site and fell into a hole. When he got out of the hospital they retired him. The lad who shot himself and didn't want to let people know, so threw his shitty kit with an actual log inside the trousers into the group wash. Fucking rotter. The 2 females and 2 males who got caught fraternizing in the briefing room the night before pass out and somehow managed to not get a 0D for it. The lad who tried to give himself a neck-shaven buzzer racing stripe 5 inches up the back of his head. The lad who broke his nose trying to impress NCOs with a backflip. The lad who was going for gunner who couldn't for The life of him figure out how to sling a rifle. Spent 5 hours practicing, crying and shit. Couldn't hack it, and after passing out eventually months after everyone else, got kicked out for drugs. Fireman AKAs was making yakisoba noodles on deployment. He asked where to get the hot water and someone pointed him at the coffee maker, which had one of those red spigots on the side. Instead of using the hot tap, AKAs opened his noodles and dumped them into the coffee maker, where the grounds go, and replaced the coffee pot with his empty noodle bowl. People would typically stop him, but we were like 6 months into deployment and he was our only source of entertainment. I have about a dozen AKAs stories. He is literally the dumbest person I've ever met, and I spent a lot of time wondering how he was still alive. Had a kid at my 1st Squadron Air Force who was quite possibly one of the dumbest, least self-aware people I've ever met. This kid either couldn't or wouldn't retain basic information, which was problematic given that he was in the intelligence career field. At one point he was presenting a briefing about North Korea, and claimed with a straight face that the capital city of North Korea was Bogota. For those keeping score, Bogota is the capital of Colombia. He tried very hard to project a redneck persona, and as part of this bought a massive bright red lifter truck with obnoxious redneck decal work. Anyone with half a brain could tell you he was struggling to pay for it on his measly 3 barracks rat pay. Eventually he decided he didn't want to pay for the truck anymore, so he drove it into a lake one night and filed an insurance claim, then used the money to immediately buy a different vehicle. This was quickly uncovered by the police, and he was kicked out of the Air Force. To this day I have no earthly idea who thought this kid belonged in military intelligence, or how he got through intel school. We had one guy in my basic training platoon that was a walking safety hazard. Among other things, he managed to fall out of a 1st floor window, got a quarter of the platoon's packs, the squad's packs, stolen during an exercise because he fell asleep watching them, fired his rifle on full auto into the fucking cap with training rounds. Luckily, because he thought he saw a wild pig rifling through our stuff in. To cap it all off, put a live round between the drill instructor's feet at the firing range. He passed basic with the rest of us. The only guy that failed because he deserted halfway through. Although he did get a mark in his file that he was unsuited for any rank with any kind of responsibility. Edit. Does anyone know what the next lower organizational unit below a platoon is called? I was in the German army and have been racking my brain for the English word ever since I posted this. The German word just translates to group, which I highly doubt is the correct term. Squad. Thanks guys, I fixed it up above. One of the kindest, sweetest, least aggressive people I know was in the Marines with me. Just a teddy bear. It's not so much that I don't know how he managed, although it was puzzling, and more that I have no idea why he wanted to. Had a girl who would hit herself in the face when she got upset. Like, full, hard slaps. It was unnerving to watch. She's also hide candy and food from the mess deck and eat it alone in the head bathroom. Our racks beds were next to each other, separated by a thin piece of metal with small holes punched in it for air circulation. One night I was reading a book and she asked me how I liked it. I asked her how she knew what I was reading and she said she was watching me through the holes in the partition. This girl made it through the recruiter MEPS, where they do a psychovalent boot camp. Clearly someone dropped the ball. Sometimes I wonder how I even made it. Then I got through the entire career. I've had the pleasure of serving with a few of those types. The 2 most memorable are, went through basic with this kid. This dude had literally never a day in his life prior done anything physical, ever. He had a permanent hunchback from sitting on the couch all his life. He was literally purple because his circulation sucked. His arms had the bat wings of an 80-year-old woman, and he honest to God had a wattle, which led to his unfortunate nickname of Turkey. He legitimately couldn't do 5 push-ups, a single sit-up. This dude couldn't even jump high enough to grab onto a pull-up bar, let alone do a pull-up. Failed every single PT test we took. The drills actually called his mother, and the army paid for her to fly out, so she could give encouragement so maybe he would finally pass one. Holmesly still graduated with us, because the drills couldn't be asked to chapter him and wanted his gaining unit to take the flak. Instead, second dude was an REEAAAL special case. 100 Goma pile type of situation. Only a few peanuts rattling around the can. It got to us right around the same time as What Does the Fox Say? Was a big deal. He considered it his favorite song, and sang it nearly constantly. He honest to God thought he was a cat, and would lick himself randomly meow at us. Dude was white as shit, but every other week he'd be repping a different gang, typically one that doesn't recruit white folk. His favorite was Latin Kings. I think he just liked yellow. We'd catch him staring at walls and shit, completely zoned out. We got orders to deploy, and nobody wanted him with us. But sadly he came along. Leadership took his firing pin, and he guarded the DFAC for the whole deployment. As soon as we got back he was chaptered for mental instability. A few of my guys are still Facebook friends with him, and according to him he was fucking John Rambo himself overseas, single-handedly clearing buildings and shit. We had a guy called Tom Sawyer. His list of offences were shaving in the chow hall, pulling his molars out with pliers, cutting his toenails and saving them above his wall locker. This will get buried, but on my first day of Navy boot camp we got off the bus and ran into the building, all lining up on in ranks. They gave us this speech about contraband etc. They gave us an opportunity to throw away any contraband we had at that moment. One of the kids in the back walked up and threw away something. The Recruit Division Commander RDC yelled, "Recruit, recruit, get back up here, now." The kid walks back up and the RDC said, "What did you just put in here?" The kid mumbles something, and the RDC says, "Pick up what you just put in there and tell me what it is." The kid picks up something, and says it is a pocket pussy, petty officer. The RDCs lost their shit on that one, but that wasn't the first time that night during the in-processing phase we all had to pee in a cup. If you got into the room and couldn't go for any reason, then you were sent back out into a large room with your sweatshirt backward to signify you didn't go. I didn't have to go yet, so I was walking around the room stopping at every fountain to get a drink. We weren't allowed to talk, just walk and drink. The same damn kid was walking just behind me with his sweatshirt backward and caught up to me. He said, "Dude, where is the RDC? I have to pee." I told him not to talk to me and sped up. On the other side of the room I decided I could go now, so I walked to the line and put at the corner of my eye I see it. This fucking kid is pissing in a fucking trash can. He ended up 3 spots behind me in line, and when he got into the room the RDC asked him why in the fuck his pants were wet. He said, "I couldn't find an RDC and I had to pee so bad I pissed myself a little, so I peed into the trash can." The look on that RDC's face was horrifying. They took him to another room and I didn't see him the rest of the day until we got to our in-processing barracks. That kid was amazingly stupid. He got sent back 3 times in boot camp, but I heard he graduated. I met so many. One of my soldiers never passed a PT test. Not once. Not in basic. Not in the real army, never. We need the personnel and we knew he wouldn't pass, so we stopped testing him. Same guy wouldn't shower. Spent 2 weeks in 100-degree desert and he didn't shower when we got back. Then there was the guy who was just plain dumb, like he had a spare tire in his car and a flat tire on his car, and the reason he didn't change them was because he couldn't figure out where the lug nuts on the flat tire were. Getting immunization needles. I overheard the nurse asking about medical family history. My family has a history of hypothermia during field training with blank rounds. Had 2 negligent discharges, ended up being charged for both. Threw their rifle down and started casing black magic on the rifle. We basically had a Goma from Full Metal Jacket, who during a few times in basic training I was actually concerned was going to murder all of us from the abuse he received. I, similarly to Joker, was assigned to unfuck this recruit, which unfortunately I was unable to do. Regardless of the instruction, advice or positive reinforcement offered, I'm convinced he was mentally unable to handle what was going on. He still contacts me about once a year 14 years later. US Army here. Thankfully my story didn't make it out of basic, but damn, I would like to punch the recruiter that put her in square in the jaw. This girl was 52. And probably weighed less than 90 pounds. She was so frail she looked like she was going to snap under the weight of her lunch tray. She was given twice as much time to eat and twice as much food as the rest of us in an effort to put some weight on her. She never ate it, just poked it for 20 minutes then threw it away. She was clearly developmentally disabled. Soldiers call each other retarded all the time as a joking insult. This wasn't the case. She was actually developmentally disabled. During reception 12 weeks of in-processing before actual basic training starts, I had to teach her how to button her pants, lace her boots, and do her laundry. She was young, maybe 18. Her boyfriend was over 40. In reception, she would be on the phone with him every walking moment possible. She was caught on multiple occasions furiously masturbating in the corner of the bay while on the phone with him. She couldn't understand that it was inappropriate. Once we shipped to actual training, she ended up in my company but a different training platoon than me. She made it 4 weeks before they took her weapon away because she wouldn't stop flagging people, accidentally aiming it at someone with it. Also, she could barely hold it up. The 9LB M16A2 was too heavy for her. She got moved to the separation company around week 5. Never saw her again. That was 9 years ago. I think about her sometimes, and wonder if she's okay. There was also the guy who ended up with smallpox on his penis. We had just gotten our vaccines and they warned us not to touch the pox that appeared because it might spread to other areas. The guy swore that the band-aid fell off and he accidentally sat on it. But everyone knew he had scratched his injection site and then jerked off. An officer walking around without his pants at 7 AM and chugging his second non-alcohol-free beer of the day. Army guy here. I went to basic with this one guy. OML. Let's start from the top. Almost shot a drill sergeant. Got a staph infection and refused to get medicine. Slept in his warm locker during toe the line. Toe the line is when you stand right by your bunks. Quiet at the position of attention and wait for your drill sergeant. Would listen to the DS explain what you would have to do and the DS would ask if there was any questions and not ask at that time, but then 5 minutes later ask him a dumbass question. We had a guy who just kept losing shit. He showed up to morning formation in a downpour without his rain jacket. And when asked just spouted, "I lost it, Master Corporal." We all had to go the day without a rain jacket. Another time he had gotten called to speak with a board of officers to see if he should stay or not. And as per the standard he had lost his beret and needed to borrow one. I, being sympathetic, lent him mine. And by the end of the day had reported back to me that he had lost my beret. He was also a cheapskate. A few of us on our infantry course would carpool when we got weekend leave and he never pitched for gas, so we just let him. He wasn't super thrilled next time we saw him. My boyfriend is in the Air Force. Did basic last year. Couple months ago during his trading course, some idiot he was stationed with disappeared during everyone's night off. Most people had gone to drink and were back on time. But not him. My BF was supposed to make sure everyone had gotten back, but he figured he just missed him and went to bed. Angry knock on his door at 4 AM. Superior yelling at him to get up. They found the guy pissed drunk. Literally pissed drunk. He peed on some firearms that were lined up outside. When my BF had to drag him to the chief warrant officer, commissioned officer or some superior like that, as he could barely stand up. While drunk dude was getting yelled at. He threw up in his superior's office, all over himself. Everyone got yelled at to just wash him and put him to bed. BF and his mates had to strip him shirtless, forcibly shower him. He was drunkenly yelling and trying to fight everyone. Forcibly dry him, forcibly put him in PJs and forcibly put him to bed. He woke up with a huge hangover without a single clue what had happened. He allegedly went very, very pale when he was told. Legend has it HES still catching up on extra duty at a typo. You find officers like this too. Not lacking basic competencies, just common sense. We had a water leak at the Naval Medical Center and the department head 06 simply kicked off her shoes so they wouldn't get wet. Part of the ceiling in the space had collapsed and the computer tower was sitting on the floor in the puddle along with her feet. It and the outlet was throwing sparks and you could see the blue light of arcing electricity inside. The tower didn't stop working until the first IT3 got there to point it out. You could feel the electricity in that room. We had a guy who literally got pushed through every different training until C school, that is, supplemental training in addition to the basic skills learned in the Navy rating schools. Having a cousin with autism, I immediately recognized some signs that this dude had to have at least 8 waivers to get him through the door. I brought it up to one of the instructors who shouted me down for being cruel and judgmental. Eventually the poor guy failed out of training and they sent him to Okinawa. Then brought him right back to the States for out processing. Diagnosis: profound autism. I fucking nailed it. Anyway, he and I still keep in touch and HE's a good guy, but man, I don't know how the Navy dropped the ball so hard during MEPS. Oh my god, all of them. I was part of the cadre for AIT Technical School, considered Part 2 or basic, and I had to file a lot of paperwork for my dumbasses. Here's a highlight reel. One of my guys ran into a pole and broke his face. Twice, on the same pole. The ink HADNT even dried on the first report before he did it the second time. Somehow a rumor started that if you could put your PT belt on a deer you'd be exempt from PT. There was an entire week where we had to keep soldiers from sneaking out the barracks with excessive number of PT belts, except we HADNT figured out why yet. Then by some sick twist of fate a deer actually ran throughout morning formation. Like, through it, and it was just a hailstorm of PT belts at the poor thing. I had one get all the way through the training just to discover the week before he graduated that he was at the wrong AIT. He was supposed to be learning a completely different specialty. I didn't even know that could happen. Health and welfare inspections are always a nightmare. None of these chuckleheads do laundry half as often as they should and half don't do it at all. Then there's the really gross fines, like bags of used sanitary products that they can't find the motivation to walk 100 yards to the dumpsters for. A hurricane came through one month and there was a conspiracy to jump off the barracks with makeshift parachutes. We successfully prevented that incident and would have got away without filing paperwork if one of them HADNT bragged about it while raking leaves at the end. One I shit you not could not spell his own name. A lot come through not knowing cursive and I figured that was the reason he was having trouble, so I said he could print on the dotted line. Motherfucker misspelled his own name. Then there was the butt plug incident. Honestly, the less said, the better. This ISNT including the petty high school bullshit these brats get up to, he said. She said, start a fight to defend my honor as our Northern Territory. The straight up crimes that happen usually involving alcohol or smuggled fried chicken. And general tomfoolery, losing important equipment. You'd think this be a reason to fear for our military's capabilities, right? No, I would not unleash those terrors on anyone except our worst enemies. Lord have mercy on them, cause these shitlords can't even spell the word. I am not military, but both my parents were while I was growing up. Had to comment this cause it always makes me law cringe. That said, one base we lived on there was an MP on guard duty at the main entrance. Usually getting on base is pretty straightforward. Exchanging of salutes, sirs, ma'ams, scanning IDs, fingerprints, all that jazz. We get up to the gate. Guard throws the salute and the usual spiel begins. But all in one go the guard goes to lean down, missteps off the curb of the hut, and like a bird against a window in a cartoon, slides down the side of the car. At the time I was maybe 89 and I tried my hardest to keep quiet, but I lost it and started laughing my ass off cause I saw the other fucking guard in the hut losing his mind. Guy gets up like nothing happens and my dad just goes if he wanted to check under the car. We kid pulled into inspection. We were the only ones at the gate, but holy shit, one of my best memories from that base. First night of actual basic. After shark attack and all that BS, we're all showering and getting ready for bed. I noticed a guy in the bunk across from me had already changed into his PTs. I asked him if he was gonna shower and he said, no. I put on 48-hour deodorant. The entire bay erupted into laughter, and for the rest of basic, my guy's name was Private 48. There was a guy next to me on the shooting range. We were supposed to fire a full mag at the target, 29 rounds. Well, when we were done his target had 0 hits, and mine had around 50. At one of my duty stations there was a girl that wasn't all there. One day, out of the blue, she decides to take the 3-wheel bike, the one with the large basket in between the 2 rear tires, and go for a spin. She hit a fence post, a parked car and a dumpster, all within 30 feet of her starting position. She eventually went to cook school. I joined when there was an increase in troops to both Iraq and Afghanistan. And as that was going on, the economy crashed, so they were letting anyone and everyone in. We had tons of those type guys in my first few units. Buckle up ladies, because I have a story. Me, former USAF officer and commander of a security forces squadron. We basically did law enforcement, flight line security, and force protection. We got in a new troop out of basic training tech school. You'll call him Snuffy. Snuffy was literally the only troop I ever encountered in my 20-year career who came to his first duty station with an Article 15 already on his record. That was unheard of in the USAF. If you get in that kind of trouble in basic or tech school, they usually just boot you. Like all first-term newbies, Snuffy has to spend a month at the base FTAC First-Term Airmen Center where they basically teach the young folks about the base, dorm life, financial responsibility, etc. Snuffy gets kicked out of FTAC after 1 week due to not showing up and tardiness. At this point, we don't know what to do with Snuffy. H is a major fuck-up. In our career field you have to carry a firearm every day. And this kid is so stupid we can't arm him. We are forced to relieve him duty, meaning he goes into limbo where he can only do stuff like pick up trash, light administrative work, etc., while we try to take steps to see if he can still be administratively discharged since HE's been on active duty only briefly. While HE is relieved of duty, he starts being late to work. This is a really big deal at this point because he basically works directly for my senior staff. This gets him in legal trouble and I'm forced to consider having him punished for dereliction of duty. Snuffy continues to spiral out of control. He married he married a local woman he just met. They move into base housing. He keeps getting in trouble while his other legal issues are still working their way through the staff judge advocate. For example, he spray paints his car with a rattle can, blowing spray paint all over his neighbor's car. He keeps dogs locked in his garage and never cleans up their poop, breaking all kinds of housing requirements, etc. This gets him kicked out of base housing. His wife leaves him shortly after he gets a rental in town. His legal issues with me are finally coming to a head when I get a tip that Snuffy has been working as an OSI Office of Special Investigation informant in a law enforcement case they're running off base. Now, I was the chief of police for the entire base. This was my troop. I had daily meetings with the head of the OSI where we discussed all open investigations. I was never told a thing. Turns out OSI was using Snuffy as an informant with some low-level druggies. In town, they had recruited him as soon as he arrived on base and entered the first-term Airman Center. Because he had that Article 15 from Basic Tech School, they pulled him into their investigation, kept him out late at night, hence him oversleeping, and just used him incessantly. When it all came to light, the OSI detachment commander finally admitted that I was furious and told me to just punish him fully. Because according to OSI what they had him doing didn't excuse him from his other issues. Ultimately, I got Snuffy administratively discharged and didn't take any judicial action against him. He wasn't fit for military life. I never really hammered the kid, or was obviously below average intelligence, and OSI exploited that. With no remorse, after Snuffy's discharge, my chief, First Sergeant, and I went out and bought the kid a bunch of stuff he needed, clothes, food, etc., to try to get him on his feet. All of us were just disgusted, not by Snuffy, but by the way we completely failed him. He was a fuck-up, for sure, but what was done to that kid was unforgivable. Female. This time, she got to her very first unit and was continuously late and argumentative with her sergeants. Just up and quit on motor pool duties a couple times, refusing to check oil levels. No idea how she got past a drill sergeant. But her entire time on active duty lasted all of 4 months before she found herself signing her discharge paperwork at JAG. I had a guy whose house was such a disgusting pigsty that the whole unit had to go clean it up for him due to him being in base housing. He let his dogs crap all over his house and never picked it up. There were bottles full of piss in his closet, and the cherry on top was that the genius sprinkled used Magnum condoms around the house when he knew the unit was coming to clean. He is easily the biggest piece of dog shit I have ever met and is now living extremely comfortably on disability welfare without lifting a finger for what are almost certainly completely fraudulent reasons. Not basic. I think the story still applies. I was in airborne school in the old shitty DFAC and one of the cadre is yelling at this bald kid with no eyebrows, "What the fuck you goth piece of shit. Don't you know this is against AR 6701 blah blah." The kid was like, "I have alopecia lol." National Guard kid. Not dissinging, but I mean y'all know. Most everyone else there is 11B18X with a little more seriousness. First week we were getting smoked and drill sergeant says, "Anyone who doesn't want to be here stand up now. We've been there long enough to assume it's a trap." Dude stands up. DS says, "Why the fuck are you standing up? You have to be here now." Private. Dude says, "I want to take the road less traveled." Drill Sergeant. H has got the interpretation of the Frost poem all wrong, but that's beside the point. DS, without missing a beat, says, "One of the US population is in the military. One of that one is in the infantry. You were on the fucking road less fucking traveled. Front-leaning rest position now." Private. Dude was on suicide watch the rest of the cycle. Extra bodies needed for night watch. He lied about us bullying him and no one ever did. We collectively told the drills he was lying to cover his ass. They took our word for it. One drill was fed up and said if dude took a tumble down the stairs and we all said he tripped then he'd believe us. We didn't like that approach. Anyway, I doubt he passed basic, but I think about it a lot. My fire team partner came home from being out one night on the weekends we were off, came into my bed and basically tried to fully clothed rape me. Dude, I got up, slept in his bed, heard a very very loud bang and went back to bed. An hour or so later, he comes strolling into his room and passes out. I go back to mine. This was all at 13ish, and when I finally get up and covered in blood. My sheets are covered in blood as well as my floor. Sure enough, he rolled out of my bed and busted the fuck out of his nose, and we all had to clean it up before we got caught. He didn't get in trouble though. He went AWOL after basic and got kicked out a year after lol. There was this super nasty dude in our platoon that smelled terrible, and the squad leader figured out it's because he washed his clothes by putting them in the freezer overnight. He also got busted malingering by purposely not hydrating in the desert heat, passing out, and having to get IVs from the medics. He did it to get out of work. Eventually they did a home health and wellness check off base and found 12 dogs living in his 2-bedroom apartment, and the floor thick as carpet with dog shit. Y'all, he was a 35 series. Intelligence. Some scout from a cav company that I was attached to as intel support somehow always showed up when I was washing my feet. My feet got so gross in the desert and baby wipes didn't cut it. One day he got the courage to approach me from around a sand dune and asked where I'm from. I said, "Iowa." He said, "Isn't that in Nebraska?" Also a woman I was in basic training with who had to have been on the spectrum. We had to teach her and coach her on how to shower. Otherwise she just stood under the water for 30 seconds. She fell asleep while live firing on the qualification range. A lot of us complained to our RPG because we would wake up with her staring at us from the end of our bunks, crouched down like a fucking animal. That's all I remember now. But she graduated. I wonder what happened to her. Hope she's okay. When I was a senior able rate aircraft technician, we would each have 2 trainee technicians assigned to us to mentor. This was around 2011. They could not be any more different. Trainee A, bright and engaged, really focused and committed. He has since commissioned as an engineering officer. Trainee B, not so much. I basically dragged him through training. He then lasted all of a week on the hangar floor before being relegated to controlling tool. Once ate a dead fly from the window to get an early finish. He lasted about 5 years total. Now works for a removal company lifting furniture. At 18 I joined the army, but unfortunately was medically discharged as I injured my knee. During the discharge process you get put in a platoon full of everyone leaving, the people being kicked out, essentially a bunch of retards. Walked into my new room that I was living in until my paperwork was ready for me to leave. To find one of my new roommates, a Scottish guy. He starts trying to show off about how HES a farmer fucking knew what mate in house HES hot shit. Tried giving me shit. Decided best way to do that was eat one of the biggest moths I've ever seen, about 30 centimeters in front of me. Forgot his name. Started with AG. Was in 2009 BCT at Fort Jackson. Of course everyone called him Gomer Pyle. He was just not someone who should be a soldier. He sucked at push-ups and everything else. Was always fucking up in our drills. And he said he loved dolphins and wanted to marry one X-200B. Also, he was the one who first told me about 4chan and the horrors that were on there. I was just 17 at the time. One of my classmates in AIT had narcolepsy. He could fall asleep standing up. And he did. He also had a really bad stuttering problem. One night on our field exercise we were practicing using a radio. He couldn't say Romeo and kept stuttering through it. Us not trying to be jackasses, were trying our hardest not to laugh. He had his mum send him several boxes of cloths to AIT, and on Saturdays he would stand there, ironing his cloths in his tan briefs with the door opened. I don't even know where he got an ironing board from. When we all graduated he had 4 large boxes of cloths and shoes along with his issued bags of cloths. He had to take on the airplane IWASNT with him at his first duty station, but I ended up at the same unit 6 months after he left the army. During that time there he totaled his car after falling asleep at the wheel and got an Article 15 for leaving his weapon in Iraq. There was this 23 or 24-year-old guy trying to be an officer. When you get injured at OCS boot camp for officers, you have to walk around in tennis shoes, a glow belt, and have a camp stool slung over your shoulder. This guy was outside our drill formation watching us march and, I shit you not, sat down crisscross applesauce on the deck with his camp stool slung over his shoulder. He somehow did not realize that you could sit down on the camp stool. The next night he woke up suddenly, smacked his face against the ceiling, and got sent home with a concussion. I had 2 like that, only based on PT standards though. So they weren't total fuck-ups or anything. One girl could only do 3 push-ups by the end. Another girl dropped out of the parade run crying. The parade run is 1.5 miles. And we do it at the end of basic to show off to everyone who came to see us graduate. There was no medical issue. She was just hot and didn't want to run. My dad says he went to basic training with a friend, who was the class clown. He wasn't a ton in shape but was able to hold up, and got pressured with extra conditioning because of his remarks that even made the drill sergeant laugh his ass off. He didn't end up passing basic training, but his instructor recommended him to join the police force, and he's now a chief police officer in Utah. Oh, my time has finally come. I am an E6 in one of the higher functioning branches of the military, not the Army or Marines. This means that you need a higher ASVAB score and they are more selective. Day 1 had a new guy coming into the unit. Talked to him on the phone a couple times and everything seemed normal. He is supposed to show up at 0800 on a Monday. 0800 rolls around and he isn't there. I call him, no answer. 1000 rolls around, still not there. I call him, no answer. I'm starting to get worried, thinking the new guy died in transit and I'm gonna have to explain this. Shit. Finally he calls me back. Hey, I'm having car trouble but he'll be in soon. No problem. Shit happens. He shows up at 1300. Car is running fine. No sign of a flat tire. Nothing. He is wearing civilian clothes. I ask where his uniform is and he tells me he changed so he wouldn't get it dirty when he was fixing his car. Okay. Again, no problem. Smart move honestly. He opened the trunk and I get the first sense that I'm in trouble with this dude. His dress uniform is crumpled in a ball tucked under a bunch of trash. I ask him what the hell and he says I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I show him where to change and get him dressed. I then drop him off with my chief who wanted to see him as soon as he got in. Chief asks me why he was late, what's going on, etc. At this point I can only shake me head. Day 2, take new guy to admin to get weighed in and paperwork filled out. New guy is 20 pounds overweight. He took 1 week of leave between school and showing up to the unit. Somehow he gained 20 pounds in a week because you were not allowed to transfer if you were over. Wait. Day 3, new guy gets armory access so that he can check our guns. I walk up to the armory to find that it is unlocked and the door is wide open. No one is around. I check the logs and sure enough new guy was the one to open it. I secure it and go to search for him. He is on the other side of the building stuffing his face. Day 4, new guy got put on a PT schedule to lose the weight. We told him to show up at 0600 and several of us would work out with him before work so he didn't have to do it alone. He showed up at 0645 saying he overslept. Day 5, he showed up at 0615 for PT. Day 6, he didn't show up for PT. Shortly after all of this I transferred to a new unit, but the last I heard was that he finally got kicked out for being overweight.
Hope you liked this video. Stay frosty my rebels.